Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors here at Cormdale Church, and I'm here with Pastor Jon. What's up, Pastor Jon?
Hey, feeling better.
Feeling better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little more awake.
A little more awake.
A little relieved.
Yes. Yes, after we had a nice break during the in between the last two.
We did.
I feel like I'm getting properly caffeinated, and I'm also probably past a certain point of digesting my food, which is good.
So you're more comfortable.
I was really tired at the beginning of the last episode.
Yeah.
So we're continuing our time in Acts chapter 16, finishing up the last half of Acts chapter 16. And I was telling Pastor Jon before we hit record.
And the lights went out.
Yeah, we this is actually our second time attempting to record this one. We got to this point last time, and then we had a weird light outage, which we fixed, and now we're back at it. But this particular sermon you preached on the last verses 16 to the end of chapter 16, we could do 3 episodes on this particular sermon. There's 3 huge themes that you could write a whole. I mean, there's like a book worthy
of each one,
topic of each one, and specifically, I mean, the passage includes a couple narratives, and drama, right? Like it starts with the slave girl, who's following around Paul and Silas and co, right?
Yeah,
and shouting. Weird. I mean, there's a weirdness here. When my life group discussed this, it's like she's got a demonic spirit. And she's shouting, "These guys are sent by God. They're servants of God, and they are proclaiming the way of salvation." And there's a big question: is like, is this like the demons, like basically proclaiming, like, listen to these guys? Like, that seems weird that the demon would be like saying, listen to these guys. Or is it kind of like when the demons recognize Jesus and they say, we know who you are, you're the most holy God, and it's like they say it and they shudder, right?
I read it, I take it as being like it's mocking. Right? So like if you imagine like some Christians got together publicly to worship. People are like, hey, these are Christians. They believe Jesus is Lord. They're preaching the gospel, right? You could say things that were true and just to mock somebody.
It reminds me of when I was in high school. There was somebody who was like mocking Christians in going down the hallways of the school and asking everybody, is Jesus your personal savior? Have you accepted him? Like as a total being total tongue in cheek, being sarcastic.
Totally.
It could be like that. So anyways, but Paul is greatly annoyed with her, which is awesome. Like, just to know, like, okay, come out of her, right?
Yeah. Which I wondered, why didn't he do that a couple days earlier?
I know.
Did he know there was a spirit in her, and he was just like, I don't know. The text doesn't say.
It reminds me of like the pleading, the widow who pleads with the master and over again. And okay, fine.
He's annoyed.
So she gets rescued from this demonic spirit, and it becomes a profit loss on some. This feels like a pimp relationship.
I didn't use that word on Sunday, but that's very much what this is.
Yeah, because some people were like, "Oh, how the heck was she even getting around calling this on these guys?" It's like she probably had her own shop, and then these guys would come and collect. Right? That's my guess on how that was set up. So. She's, I don't imagine her with shackles around her neck. Like, I'm imagining her as she is basically like one of the many guys, these people that these guys had under their thumb.
They offered her protection.
Yeah, exactly. So the spirit, they were getting a lot of profit from this
gain, Luke says.
Yeah, from this demonic spirit who gave this woman the ability to tell fortunes. And it's crazy because it turns into these guys think they have a legal case against Paul for setting the woman free from the it's interesting, she's a slave in 2 ways. She's a slave to the spirit, and she's a slave to these masters. And by freeing her from the demonic spirit, they made her useless to the masters. And so they get frustrated. They halt, like they take them to the magistrates, accuse them of breaking Roman law,
which they weren't.
I mean, part of me wonders if they were trying to talk about, like, I don't know, like, were they trying? Because I know that, like, I read something, again, going back to what's that book we talked, Triumph of Christianity? One of the things that is interesting is that the Triumph of Christianity talks about how even just gathering, and churches gathered a lot, Christians gathered a lot, was considered like against Roman law.
Yeah.
So
could be, yeah.
So were they picking something else out? I don't know. But there's nothing about Roman law that says you can't cast out a demon.
No, you could be a Jew. Judaism was a
true.
It was a state sanctioned, but state approved. Religion in Rome.
And if they were considered, if they knew that, then they were absolutely false accusing them.
Yeah.
Yes. So then the magistrates, like, I don't know, it feels like they're in the pocket of these businessmen because they just go with it.
Yeah.
They beat the tar out of these guys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like a roughing up. They had wounds.
Yeah.
Right?
This is like big pharma and politicians.
Whoa.
This is going to get fact checked.
I'm not going to mention a politician's name. I almost did. I was like, yeah, they must have worked for somebody. They end up getting imprisoned, and then they're singing hymns, they're praising God.
Yep.
And
earthquake comes. Doors, shackles
come undone, doors open. The prison guard is like panicking because the prisoners got away and starts to kill himself.
Yeah.
And
he's
then,
ready. He's
got the sword. And then
Paul stops him.
He's like, stop. Don't harm yourself. We're still here, see? And then, amazingly, the first question out of the guy's mouth is like, what must they do to be saved? And like you mentioned, like maybe he was listening in on the hymn singing. And then there's this really weird break, which makes me wonder about what kind of building was this prison? Because all of a sudden, they're hanging out with him in his house.
Yes.
And with his family.
Yep.
And then him and his family get baptized, his household get baptized. And then he washes their wounds. Really beautiful imagery of the washing of the wounds and the baptism of the family.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I just love that.
Yeah.
And then they're still in the prison. I'm like, I think this must be an upstairs. You're living above the prison.
It's exactly what that was.
Yeah. Which is kind of
parsonages that's connected to the prison. So the jailers are always available.
But he's living there with his family.
He's living there with his family.
Which is kind of like, hey, honey, or I want to marry you. What do you do? I keep prison.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh. So, we have to live with a bunch of criminals downstairs.
Well, they were chained, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But, your kids are like, oh, yeah, the prisoners
kids don't go downstairs.
Don't go downstairs, yeah. So, they go. It actually says they go up to meet the family.
Yep.
And then they baptize, and then they get sent the note from the magistrates. You can go.
Yeah.
Right?
And Paul's like, no. We're not going.
Yeah. And there's twice that Paul doesn't leave his cell.
Yep.
Because he's waiting for something. He wants to talk to these magistrates and tell them what's what. And then he basically says, we have rights as Roman citizens, and you broke them illegally. They accused him of doing something illegal that wasn't illegal.
Yeah.
And then he throws it in their face that actually you're the one who has done something illegal. Sounds really...
He should have just loved his neighbor and shut up.
I mean, those are the kind of things that are happening today.
Yeah.
Like when members of your church are arrested for singing psalms in protest of the local government, and then they arrest you, and then they let you go, and then after the court case, it determines that the state was actually the ones that were in the wrong.
Yeah.
That's happening right now.
Yeah, and I know the specific case you're talking about, and what's really I think sad and unfortunate is that there are a lot of Christians who would throw shade on that.
Yeah,
but this is exactly what Paul's doing.
Yes,
right here.
Yes,
he was wrongfully treated, and then he accused them that they had actually broken the law. Right?
Yeah,
and
I
don't get it.
Yeah, it's so there's the three big buckets that we could do 3 episodes.
Economics, civics, family.
Exactly. Economics, civics, and family. Because the first thing you talk about, and it's obvious in this passage, is how there is a disruption the gospel brings to real life, on the ground, economic stuff, right?
Business.
And you highlighted how if the gospel was to go out, and I put these words in your mouth a little bit, if we were to experience real revival, okay, in our country, in our state, there are businesses that would lose all their revenue.
They would cease to exist.
They would cease to exist
immediately.
And they would become obsolete.
Yeah.
They're, like you mentioned, Planned Parenthood. You mentioned sex trafficking, the porn industry.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of tendency to think that, like, the gospel isn't about this on the ground stuff. Christ wants the heart, so we shouldn't be concerned about this economic stuff.
Right.
And it's hard. I mean, even in this passage, it's hard to say that Paul was motivated necessarily to free this woman. He was annoyed.
Yeah.
but it's amazing because Paul's presence and the deliverance that happened when he, miraculously called this demon out of this woman is kind of a picture of what happens anytime the gospel goes out.
Yep.
You're delivered from your idolatries. You're delivered from those captivities, and it does change things. And so the fruit of idolatry is the sinful corruption and brokenness of a culture. And so
and economies are
built on this.
On that.
Yes. And so I'm always reminded. So there's a kind of tendency to think that if you're upset about those things, that you're not focusing on the right thing. And I think that that's kind of baloney. Like it's totally fair to be super sad and upset about things happening that are hurting your neighbors.
Oh, 100%.
But it gets couched as like you just care about you just care about you're not caring about the heart.
Right. So let's dive in that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'll just low hanging fruit. Let's talk about the porn industry.
Yeah.
Okay. So the numbers that I found, you have to be careful when you're doing research on Google about the porn industry, was I think it was 12 billion annually in our country, 100 billion annually globally. Okay.
Yeah.
So when as a Christian you look at that and your heart breaks, there are countless levels to that, right? First, there is the human trafficking thing. It is an undeniable fact that many of the women who get sucked into the to the porn industry are trafficked. If they weren't trafficked, an incredibly high percentage of them were sexually abused as young girls, right? So when you talk about wanting to, we'd like to see that no longer be an issue, you're saying, I want there to be no human trafficking. I want I want young girls to be respected and not abused or molested by, whoever.
Yeah.
Then you've got human trafficking. You've got women being treated like objects and like just dirt. We'd like to not see that happen. Then on the other side of every porn addiction is a dumpster of a relationship.
Yes.
We've seen how porn addictions destroy marriages. How they demotivate men. They strap people with guilt and shame. You get sucked into this addiction, and it doesn't just affect or hurt the person who's consuming the pornographic material. It's all the relationships that person is involved in, because it just sucks your soul dry,
There's no such thing as an isolated individual sin. It
No.
always impacts. We are made for community, and you are always impacting the community when you're in your sin.
Yeah. So we don't want people to be trafficked. We don't want them to be abused. Mm-hmm. We don't want people to be given over to this addiction. Mm-hmm. We don't want their marriage and their families to suffer because of this, right? And then what I was trying to thread the needle on Sunday is think about what $12 billion redirected to righteous causes in our country does.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right? Because, your money goes to whatever you worship.
Yes.
And people worship, porn and the god of porn. And so money, incredible money is being, directed towards this sinful, broken, oppressive, nasty, life-ruining industry.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want women being free and families being whole and resources going to really healthy things instead of self-destructive humans? I mean, it's like, can you not think that through?
Yeah, exactly. There's a kind of I wrote that down, this question, and the question was, is there a connection between the gospel having a destructive impact on sinful industries? Because if people are coming to Christ and repenting, the sad thing is that one of the saddest things is that a good percentage of those patrons to pornography are Christians.
Christians, yeah.
So that's another issue.
Yeah. Let's pause for a second. Yeah. So if you're watching this right now and you have a porn problem, you need to talk to your pastor.
Yep.
ASAP.
Yep.
We love you. We can help you, but we can't do anything if you don't talk to us. Yeah. So if you've got that problem, the next time you see your pastor, or send an email to pastor@corndalechurch.org, we will help you.
Yeah.
Christ can free you from that.
Yes.
There's absolutely freedom from it, but it's not going to happen by you
being content with it.
Or keeping it in the dark and hiding it. So,
don't keep it in the dark. Yeah.
Okay.
So good. It was super important.
If you're not at this church, go talk to your pastor at the church that you're at.
So, but I think there's a connection between the gospel dismantles broken industry, but the gospel also impacts people so that they want to produce good industry for the industry for the common good.
Yeah.
Industry and I think that's it's not just don't just think altruism in terms of I want an industry that's just simply I'm thinking some people might put in that category Tom's shoes. Mm-hmm. Your company doesn't impact the common good unless you're giving one for one, or creating a product, thinking about the needs of others, and creating a product or a service that meets those needs requires love. Mm-hmm. It requires thinking about what others need,
right?
And it's something that hopefully helps them in some way, and then you are risking yourselves by putting up capital in order to pursue that. Yeah. That's a loving thing to do.
Yeah.
In hopes of that actually being a service to somebody and a good that somebody needs and can enjoy, in hope for reciprocation, acknowledgement, and that would be receiving profit. Yeah. So you can continue doing what you're doing, and then on top of that, that's just the entrepreneurial mindset. On top of that, you also, if you're doing that, you're the person putting up risk. You all of a sudden can hire people and give people the dignity of work. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
I've said in the past on one of these episodes, the gleaning laws, right?
You still had to work for it.
Yeah, you still in God's wisdom, He never instituted a centralized distribution center for food. He never that's not a thing He tells His people to do.
Yeah.
He says, don't harvest your crop completely. Leave the corners for the poor. Mm-hmm. But the poor
still got to come out.
They got to come out. But what He was doing is giving the poor the dignity of work. Yeah. Even if they didn't have the land to work, they were given the dignity of harvesting and working for it. So there's a kind of I think that's really, sometimes we miss that. There's a sad critique against. It's not just a critique; it's a lean. We lean into thinking Christians shouldn't be making for-profit companies,
right?
Or we feel guilty for making money, or like this kind of like I don't, but I know that there are people who do. Right. There's a kind of tendency to think, give it all away means don't ever, seek to make something that will result in you making money. But when you do that, you actually have a lot of potential to help people, to give people jobs. So I think about there's two angles here. Mm-hmm. The one is the negative and one is the positive. The gospel negatively disrupts the industries that are harmful, and it positively produces love and lifts up people by saying there's nothing greater than to realize that you are made in the image of God, created with all this amazing creativity potential to do things. And to do things for His glory. All of a sudden you have a reason to do things, right?
Absolutely.
So there's, on the flip side, you have that too. So
we were talking about this last night at our elder meeting about we're looking 5 to 10 to 20 years down the road and thinking about how education is going to change and vocation is going to change. And one of the things that we need to be thinking about is jobs and entrepreneurs and Christians seeing launching and starting businesses as part of discipleship, as part of mission. Because when you have a business, and just what you're saying, that you're meeting a need in the community, right? That's what good business does. It identifies the need, right? And then it meets that need. So there's value to the customer. That's why they're paying you for it. But when you do that as a business owner, then you're also multiplying, and now you're employing people who have households that are paying mortgages, excuse me, and going to the grocery store, and this community is thriving as a result of that. Right? And there's all sorts of reasons that Christians need to be thinking more about that. But there's an economic transformation that takes place when Christians start to connect the dots.
And lay down roots.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that could have been a whole episode, just digging into that even more. The idea of Christian and the gospel's impact upon economics and industry, and there's lots we could talk about there. But the next thing we got to talk about is that Paul brings up his rights. Right? And you kind of hinted at this earlier, like, what? Aren't Christians supposed to lay down their rights? Right? Isn't that the loving thing to do? To just shut up and let people roll over you, right?
Do you think any Christian would have ever said that to Rosa Parks?
I mean, maybe at the time, there probably were people who called themselves Christians who would have said that to her. Right?
Yeah, can you imagine any of the Christians who are saying it now?
No.
Lay down your rights, woman.
But the same people who would say no, they would never say that to Rosa Parks, would say that what you are encountering is totally insignificant compared. And there may actually be some truth to that. But I don't think the insignificance of so.
The principle can be the same.
Why can't you pull out the weed when it's just there? And it's like, instead of pull it out when it's full grown.
Right.
Like, no, we got to let that weed get gross. So gross that it's undeniable. Like, and I think that actually it's more gross than people let on. Some of this stuff that's going on right now with pastors being in prison for opening their doors, fences built around that church in Canada, governors saying your church can only be meeting or you need to separate people based on vaccination status. Like, these things are just
just real quick about the vaccination status thing, because it kind of surprises me how many people don't remember or don't know that our governor made that request to our church, that we would identify people's vaccination status and basically the passport thing, and people who had been vaccinated should have preferred seating, and people who did not would have, would be seating somewhere else. And You go, who would ever do that?
Yeah.
And then there are churches that are connected to very prominent evangelical pastor, author,
that are making the unvaccinated
speaker.
sit in the balcony.
Yes, who are absolutely doing the opposite of what James tells us to do. We're not to differentiate our brothers based on wealth, is what he's specifically dealing with, but based on any sort of social status or standing. Like it's crazy. That's actually happening.
Yeah.
Like if you
that weed is a little that weed is a little more than a little sprout.
Yeah, it ain't a sprout.
It ain't a sprout. So
it ain't a sprout. At all.
So there, but that would be the criticism. The criticism would be, it's nothing compared to Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
And but I actually think that criticism is so weak. It's weak sauce. It doesn't hold water, because the point in this situation with Paul. Okay, so Paul got beat up.
Yep.
Okay, now Paul basically his point of wanting to confront the magistrates is really it's like a power move, right?
Yeah.
He's like, no. Don't let it, you need to come and apologize. You need to come.
Right.
And he's not saying you need to come and become a Christian. He's saying you need to come and humble yourself.
Right.
And I want people to see you saying you're wrong in front of all these people.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things about that. I don't know how much time we have to go into them. But one of the things I tried to identify on Sunday is that you need to understand that there's law and then there's politicians and magistrates. That they are under the law.
Yeah, exactly.
They're accountable to that law. That's why Paul can appeal to the law and rightfully accuse the magistrates of being in violation of the law.
Yeah.
They are not the law.
Yeah.
It's the Lex Rex.
Yes, Lex. They're not. They are responsible to follow the law, just like Paul and them are, and they're basically calling them to account for acting illegally.
Right.
And I think that Paul invoking his rights in order to make a statement is really interesting, all in itself, because it's not like he's invoking his rights to get some status, or like, I mean, it's
he's not looking for special treatment.
He's not looking for he's not looking to, he's not being starved and wanting to get food. Yeah. It's like he wants, the point of Paul's getting them to come is for them to acknowledge they were wrong.
Yeah.
And for that to be a public thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the gut reaction, be like, really, you can do that? It's like, no, yeah, because you said this, and I thought this is super helpful, and I think it's substantiated by something earlier in Matthew 16 or Acts 16. But you said that Paul, why is he doing this? Well, when he stands up for his rights, he's also standing up for the rights of his people, of the people. He's calling the magistrate out for the sake of the rights of the people, right? Yep. So there's a kind of this is what we were talking about earlier, but like earlier in Acts 16, Paul gets a vision, and it's a vision of man from Macedonia, which is where Philippi and all this is happening. He says, "Come and help us." Well, we don't ever get something in the passage that says, and that's how Paul helped whatever that man represented. I think he represents the church in Macedonia. And what we do see is that when Paul shows up in Philippi, he gets arrested, and the arrest leads to two things. Yep. It leads to the humbling of the magistrates.
Yep. Publicly.
The public humbling of the magistrates. Yeah. And it leads to a policeman/jailer being converted to Christ. Christian. So the church now has a humbled magistrate and a inside man. Yeah. in the state.
And you also, I think, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's how he's helping them. There's also, you're telling the church, you're okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, they can't treat you this way.
Yes.
And here's the example. Here's this case study. Yep. They did it. They were wrong. They had to own it. Yeah. And absolutely.
Yeah. So we're getting close on time. Do you want to do a different episode on households? Because that was the last one. Or do you want to just touch it now for 5 minutes?
I don't know. Your call.
I think that there's too much to say with households.
Okay.
It's so, I mean, there's just so much, well, we could do 5 minutes.
Let's do it. 5 minutes. Here we go.
So the last point you talked about was, it's the household of Lydia. It's the household of this jailer.
Yep.
It's
you and your children.
You and your children in Acts 2. And then there's this generational, you talked about how God cares about households.
Yeah.
God cares about.
He doesn't just save individuals.
He doesn't just save individuals.
The pattern in Acts is you and your household.
Yes.
Starting at the preaching of Pentecost, when they say, "Hey, what should we do? This promise is for you and for your children."
Yes. Yes.
And that pattern gets repeated. The Cornelius, it was him and his household.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Lydia, like you said, her and her household. Here, the Philippian jailer and his household, and that's going to happen more in the future as well.
Yeah.
So. You go, well, what do you do about that? And so I kind of made a passing kind of joke comment that some people would have picked up on Sunday about
paedo
baptism and the baptism discussion, which, just for the record, I don't actually think these verses are helpful on either side of the discussion because they require you to assume something that I don't think is necessarily there.
The principle of households, though.
But the principle of God's faithfulness extended not just to the Philippian jailer, but to his household, and not just to Lydia, but to her household, and not just to Cornelius, but to her or his household, and not just to these individual Jews that were responding to the gospel in Acts 2, but and their children. Yeah. There is something there, and I think you have to.
Yeah, the principle of households in the Paedo-Baptist argument is something that doesn't begin in the New Testament.
No.
It begins in the Old Testament.
And that whole discussion.
Yeah.
But that is so fundamental. If you're going to understand the Paedo position, you have to start where covenants start and covenant signs start, and that's not in Acts, that's in Genesis.
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, that changes the entire. But we don't need to go there.
Yeah, we don't need to go there right now.
But the principle of households.
Yes, exactly, and the principle of generational blessing.
Yeah.
Right. You get the sense from the Old Testament that God is eager to bless generationally. I think that I'm forgetting the place, but to the wicked, he will the sins of the father will rest on the second and third generation.
Yeah.
And then it's contrasted with, but the righteous to the thousandth generation.
Yeah.
Meaning the point isn't like
a lot
of people are so focused on we have generational sin that we're dealing with in our family because we're the third generation. I've been in conversations like that with people, but the point really isn't of that passage the generational visitation of sin.
Yeah.
The point of that passage is look at how eagerly God is to bless to the thousandth generation of those who love him.
Yeah.
Right?
His anger lasts for a moment, but his love lasts for.
So
this is, you shall not bow down to them or serve them. This is Exodus 20. For the Lord your God, I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that 1,000 generations also, that's a lot of time. I think that I did the math, that's something like 20,000 years.
Yeah.
So
we got some time to go. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think 1,000.
If you're
I think 1,000 generations is supposed to be, like, a big number for the sake of just emphasizing bigness. But usually those big numbers to emphasize bigness are on the shallow side of the like. It's just, the point is like big, and so let's pick a big number. It's not like it's 1,000, but we really mean 50.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Like that would be silly, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why that language is one of the reasons why I lean post-mill.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that sounds like there has to be a lot of time on the clock for that not to be seen as a sarcastic, hyperbolic statement.
Right. So households.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things on Sunday, you have your notes and you're preaching, and then sometimes God's just like,
yeah.
And I was thinking about like the story of my mom.
Yeah.
And she passed away a couple years ago, and her birthday was just 2 days ago. And so, like, her story is an example of what this text is saying. She was raised at the end of World War II, did not come from a believing home. My dad was raised in Wisconsin, not coming from a believing home. As far as I know, he and she were the first in their families to become Christian. I don't think there's any other Christians on her side of the family. I don't know that for sure, but I believe that to be true. So they got married and then had kids, and then they got saved, and then I have 3 older sisters, right? And then there's me and my brother. So they got saved. Then the family got saved. We're all married to Christians. We all have children who, are in the faith. And you're like, that's what that is, right? It's households and generations, and it's legacy. And there's a picture. There's a couple in our family. I won't name them, or a couple in our church. I won't name them right now. They recently posted a family reunion picture on Facebook, and it was like, I don't know, between all the kids and the grandkids, it was like 50 people or something like that. And I thought, dang. Yeah. These are 2 Christians. Yeah. And now there's all these multi-generations of Christians coming from that. Like, God he starts working in a family line, and he keeps working that line. And there's a very encouraging side to that. Because I'm saying this on a Sunday, and there are people in our church who are the only one in their family to believe, right? And sometimes that's a kid who's come to faith and has non-believing parents, and sometimes it's the wife. It's the wife, or it might be the husband. And to know, like, this idea that God has brought you to Himself, and He's starting something in your family, right? The trajectory is changing, and it started with you, and both Peter and Paul talk about the effect of a believing spouse on the other spouse. Right? That God can use that to bring them to faith, and then the children come to faith. And now you fast forward 100 years, and you've got generations and children and grandchildren who are in the faith, and it all started with God being faithful to this person and then their household. That's awesome.
It's amazing.
It is incredible.
I know,
it's a beautiful thing.
I don't even know. I have such a shallow understanding of my heritage. Like, I don't go much further than, like, my great grandparents. I don't know much else, but it makes me wonder, like, where did we? I don't even know where. Like, I know on my mom's side, it was like she was, her brother became a Christian and then shared the gospel with her, and their family was not a Christian. My dad's side has a heritage of people believing in Christ. Okay. So. But I don't know how far that goes back.
Well, there's, you don't always want to share personal stuff and names, but there's people here where a kid came to faith. Mom and dad came to faith. The other sibling came to faith. The spouse of the sibling came to faith. The child of the family. It's just like, yes, this is how God works. He is faithful to us as individuals and to our households.
Totally.
Which is incredible.
It's an exciting thing. And also is hope for parents who are discipling their kids.
Yeah. And, so while we're talking about this, part of what's kind of kicking in the back of my head is the Barna number of the 70 or 80% of the kids who go off to college and then they leave the faith. And I think there's all sorts of explanations for that. We've talked a lot about, we pull kids out of church from the time they're born. They're never part of the service. They're never taught to believe that they are actually part of the church. Special, and you do that until they're like 40 years old, and then finally you've gone through the college and the post-college and the single, and it's like, okay, well, now you're 40, now you can come to church, right? And I think that's incredibly
destructive.
I think that can be incredibly destructive. I think that's an issue. I think you've got a lot of non-Christian families in the church, and that's just getting exposed when the kids go to college. That there really was never a Christian foundation laid. But I also wonder if they're counting too soon. And it's like, these kids are baptized kids, and those baptisms mean something. And I wonder how many of that 80% are going to come
Yeah, sure.
Back to faith, because God is faithful.
Yeah.
Right?
There are hopefully a lot of parents praying for that too.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't think the story's done for that 80%.
Yeah, for sure.
Because God saves the parents and the household.
Yeah, to the uttermost. Yeah.
To the uttermost, absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think that's
that
good.
Was 10 minutes.
10 minutes
that
over.
Was a preacher's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's like a baker's dozen and a preacher's 10. Or a preacher's 5.
Man, I'm really good at the preacher's 5.
Yeah, me too.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed considering Acts 16. Again, I want to remind you also, if you have questions about Revelation, you can send those to pastor@quorumdeochurch.org. We are going to do a special Revelation episode of Sermon B-Side, so I want to encourage you to do that. Otherwise, until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See you guys.
See ya.